Good morning, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to be here this morning on this Facebook Live. Can't quite believe Chrissa has given me the reins this morning. I feel very excited. Hopefully, there are big shoes to fill there. Hopefully, I can do that this morning. And I hope you're all lovely and warm wherever you are. We've had some crazy weather over the past few days. I will give people a couple of minutes to just join us. But in the meantime, hello, my name's Kelly Jarvis. I am the head of advocacy and consultancy here at Sunshine Support. And do say hello if you can see me. If you see me looking away, it's because I've got the comments next to me here, so I can keep an eye on the chat and hopefully answer as many questions as I can today. So if you see me looking down, that's because I'm sort of keeping an eye on all the conversation as well. And a special welcome to anybody who's watching us today on YouTube. And I've got my lovely sunshine elves in the background who will be pinging me your questions from YouTube as well. So hopefully by the end of the morning session, I will have been able to answer lots and lots of questions about this really important topic. Do say hi if you can see me. Hi, Yvonne. Hi, Emma. Hi, everybody. Hi, Nicole. Lovely to see you all in the chat. Do keep the chat nice and lively. Don't be afraid. No question is a silly question. It's so rare that I get this opportunity to talk to so many of you. So grab that by both hands and do let me know if you have any questions or thoughts, and I'll address as many of them as I can in the chat. So just another hello. Oh, hello. I can see people I know in the chat. I do love that. You know, these Facebook Lives, we make them look so effortless. I'll share this with you. Okay, it's my confidants today. They stress me out. Facebook Live, scary things. So it's lovely to see people I know. So hi everyone in the chat. So just a little introduction again. My name's Kelly Jarvis. I'm the head of advocacy and consultancy here at Sunshine Support. I am delighted to be here this morning to talk about a really current, very worrying issue arising in SEND education at present. And of course, this is why you're all here, to learn more about that and to sort of discuss the landscape with regard to this issue. And of course, that is the issue of cost-cutting measures across education, but particularly special educational needs education. It is very topical at the moment. Almost every other day, we are seeing articles and news posted about this issue. We've obviously got a brand new government in place, and they're sort of coming in and making changes and talking about reform. And that sort of impacted the landscape there as well. We actually did a Facebook Live about this before Christmas, a few weeks before Christmas, with our founder, Chrissa, who you'll all know very well, and my wonderful colleague, Gabby Gregory. Well, the Facebook Live then was mainly about how EHC funding is used in schools, but the opening position in that Facebook Live summarised some of the huge shortfalls in councils in terms of their spends, and how there's this significant pressure to reduce budget deficits. Now, that Facebook Live is actually watchable on our YouTube channel if you're interested in that. And hey, another special hi to those watching on our YouTube channel, and hopefully our elves will ping me some questions from over there, and I'll try to get through, like I said, as many questions as I can during this Facebook Live, so you know, keep them coming. Particularly, let us know in the comments if you and your family have already been impacted by these cost-cutting measures. If you feel able, please do share your experiences in the comments, and you know, let's get some discussion going. I can see straight away that you know, people are already saying that actually a big problem is that they're finding that the local authorities don't actually use their funding cost effectively. And we know about that. And I'll be talking about that during this Facebook Live this morning. A perfect example of where funding isn't used effectively, or essentially resources, money isn't used effectively, is of course the huge overspend on taking families to tribunal, which is eye-wateringly expensive over the course of just one family going to tribunal. And what we're finding is so many tribunals are happening where the local authority has a very, very little chance of being successful because the basic application of the law means that the family will win. Yet the family are sort of dragged through this process, which can take up to, and in some cases longer than, a year, with local authority instructing barristers and everything at a huge, huge cost, and then aren't successful at the end. And if you just take one family in that journey and then funnel that funding into that child's needs, where would we be then? And that is something that we talk about a lot at Sunshine Support. So on that Facebook Live, I mentioned that we did just before Christmas, a few weeks before Christmas, I gave a few examples of some of the specific deficits that councils are facing. And I just thought it'd be useful to share some of those with you. So, for example, Leeds City Council needs to find £273.7 million in further savings over the next 5 financial years. They've been told that that's what they need to do. And Leeds have cited adult social care and increases in the number of children with more significant needs, quote, requiring care, which has led to this huge deficit and then the need to find this additional money. Wakefield Council have an 88 million budget gap over the next 5 years, and they have also cited the rise in adult and children's social care service demands, which is, it's very typical of the things we're seeing. Calderdale Local Authority have a funding gap of 15.7 million this year, and over the next 3 years, it needs to find savings of 39.3 million. This is not an isolated thing. Almost every local authority is facing these huge deficits, and I can see from the comments already that this is something that parents, you yourselves, are experiencing, where for no reason and with no evidence, local authorities are just pulling funding which has been in place for a considerable amount of time, particularly with regard to social care. So funding that has been in place for say, like a personal assistant, and it just being pulled. And if you flip that on its head, if parents want to seek a change to provision that a child receives, either special educational provision or social care provision, particularly if they need an uplift because a child's needs have become more acute or more challenging, the number of hoops you have to jump through in terms of evidence and the judgment you experience from councils as to the quality of your evidence and the credibility of your professionals, and oh well, you're just the parent, we can't take your word for it that you need this support, we need all these reports, and then it takes you a waiting list of 2 years to get them. That level of evidence to change that provision, the threshold is huge, but then the threshold doesn't seem to apply the other way around. So, okay, well, you don't need this PA anymore, so we're just going to remove it. Okay, so where's the evidence for that? Well, we're just going to remove it. If you don't like it, you can then go to tribunal. And then, of course, you then have to wait for a year to be heard at tribunal. And somebody's put in the comments already that tribunal is a delaying tactic. And I do my absolute very best not to be cynical. I really do. I am a person who is eternally positive and very, very solution focused. And any families who work with me know that's how I work. I'm always, trying to support the local authority to make the right decision and to use the information that they have in the right way. And I'm very empathetic to the individual struggles of case officers who have a big job to do. However, I can't help but be cynical now, because there have been too many situations where the most robust evidence and the most, the clearest way forward has been presented. Yet here we find ourselves being taken to tribunal. And in being taken to tribunal, the local authority then doesn't have to fund that provision until such a time that a court says that they have to. And that can be up to a year. The thing that makes me crazy, though, is that what they will fund in the meantime is a barrister. But again, what we're seeing is that barristers often come in right at the end of the process. So the process is managed by, say, a tribunal officer, and then a barrister or counsel comes on to the hearing. And I was only in a hearing just before Christmas where the poor barrister just basically had no information whatsoever. The case had been really poorly managed by the local authority. The barrister had essentially been given very poor instructions, and the judge just lost all patience and was like, this is incompetent, this is, and you just think, gosh, how much money did that cost? It is just beyond all belief. It's just crazy. And this is something that we're seeing, people saying we had to pay nearly £1,000 to get the right evidence to take this forward to tribunal. It is just, yeah, awful. So what's going on with these cost-cutting measures then? Because it does seem to be somewhat, I don't know, like a, what's the word that I want? Can't think of the word. You see, I'm a trained English teacher and words desert me sometimes, but it definitely seems to be a strange dichotomy, I guess, between we're trying to cut loads of costs, but we're also spending loads of money on tribunals. So what exactly is going on with these cost-cutting measures? Now, you may have read that in October, there was a really quite a big piece of research done via a survey by the County Councils Network, the CCN. And this happened at the end of October. And this revealed some quite concerning and telling information. The first thing is that up to 26, and I even think that since October, this has probably increased, but at that time it was 26 of England's largest councils could have to declare bankruptcy by 2027 if the multi-billion special educational needs and disability services deficits they're grappling with are placed onto their budget books. And this warning from the CCN essentially projects further deficits that could potentially triple overnight and push up to 60% more councils into insolvency, so bankruptcy. Now, it is crazy that so many councils are facing such a huge deficit, and we are hearing lots of quite inflammatory words being thrown around by councils, and Chrissa talks about this a lot in her reels, and I know we talked about it in our previous Facebook Live, whereby there's almost like a blame feeling of, the country's most vulnerable people, so vulnerable adults who need social care, vulnerable disabled children, children with special educational needs and disabilities, are being sort of lambasted, I guess, as the reason for this overspend. And so often I'm in discussions with quite senior people at local authorities who sort of make passing comment about, well, there's such a demand. There's so many parents now asking for an EHCP. There's so many, the concept of parents asking for an EHCP as though it will get them something that it will get them some sort of money themselves or something. It's this vibe about it that I really don't like. And it places this sort of blame on our most vulnerable young people. No SEND family wish to be in the situation they're in. No parent imagines having children and not being able to happily wave them off to school in the morning. No parent seeks to keep their child at home, not really. They would much rather have a much more straightforward family existence than, say, a child who really suffers from emotional-based school avoidance, or for whom school just isn't the right place and therefore they can't go to school. No one asks for that, and therefore to sort of talk very openly about, oh, our send families, our send children, our vulnerable social care needing adults. This is all causing this big deficit. There's something that really sort of doesn't sit right with me about that, because it creates this culture of suspicion, I guess, in people who don't really know the situation. So this data analysis that's happened by the county council's network has shown that this rising demand on social care services, on special educational needs services, has amassed across these largest local authorities in England what has been termed as unmanageable send deficits of up to £2 billion. And this figure is projected to rise to 2.7 billion in 2025, 2026. And nationally, these deficits are now estimated to actually be more close to 4 billion, growing to 5.9 billion this year. And they're actually being kept off the council's budget books due to a particular method of accountancy, this survey has shown, called the statutory override, and that's due to expire in March 2026. So what you'll see is it being sort of managed on paper at the moment, and then there's going to be this massive explosion where that overrides, and that override is expires essentially. And the research by the CCN showed that this is driven by this record expenditure, and it's termed as an explosion in the number of children on specialist educational health and care plans, and what has been described as an over-reliance on special school places, particularly in the independent sector. And this high needs expenditure has gone from 2.5 billion in 2018 to an estimated 5 billion next year. Now, we've already seen in the comments today that somebody has said that their young person, their child, is in a special needs, an independent special needs setting. So a specialist setting, it's independent, so it therefore carries a greater funding implication. And he was very happy there, really, really settled there, and thriving. So going from a period of real crisis to being placed in this setting, to being able to contemplate and engage with GCSEs, really, really thriving because of the on-site multidisciplinary speech language, all of that type of thing. And then just literally out of the blue, this family got called by a different specialist setting, a local authority maintained specialist setting, and just got told, your son's on roll with us now. And it's like, well, hang on, no, he's already settled at a school. What do you mean he's on roll with you? And this had all been done by the local authority in the background. So none of the legal proceedings to change a young person's placement from one to another, such as an annual review, and this is what has to happen. You have to have an annual review. You have to, put forward the evidence as to why a placement change is sought. If a parent was seeking a placement change, like I said at the beginning, you have to jump through so many hoops, right? This had all happened in the background without this parent's knowledge. And the school that the local authority was saying this young person was now on roll at was completely inappropriate, because they did not provide any of the GCSEs that this lad was studying in his setting where he was settled. And there was literally no evidence or benefit to move him to a different setting other than a cost-saving measure for the local authority. Where is the evidence? Doesn't exist. Where is the advantage for this young person to move to such a setting? There isn't one. And this is all at the cost of his future. And not just him, but of course the wider impact on the family. And for that to happen in the background, and it not to all be open via an annual review, via the proper process, it is absolutely staggeringly terrible. And this is happening to families everywhere. And that's just sort of one example of some of these, cost-cutting measures, which it's a plaster, isn't it? It's a sticking plaster for a longer term problem. You're just moving the problem, because if you put a young person in a completely inappropriate setting, all that's going to do is cause a greater level of dysregulation and distress. It's going to mean that that young person doesn't obtain, the qualifications they need in order to make the further steps in their life, to make, social and emotional progress, which is equally as important as qualifications. If they're not going to be doing those things, then later down the track, the impact on society is going to be greater, and then the cost impact is going to be greater. And it just beggars belief that such a short-term solution can be seen as the way forward to cause such a huge longer-term problem. We've got Becky in the chat saying the local authority is saying that he'd be fine in mainstream despite where he was previously traumatized. But then he's been offered 2 special school placements because those consultation that have gone to those special schools recognise that actually that EHC plan is more suited to a specialist setting. So how on earth can the local authority then make the decision that a mainstream placement is suitable? It's just crazy. One particular local authority is mentioned a few times in the chat. They had a very poor Ofsted report, yet nothing appears to have changed. And in fact, things appear to even be getting worse, which is a real worry. I'm just scrolling through some of your questions now, and hopefully we'll get through to some of them just as we go through. So what else is this research by the CCN saying? Essentially, the CCN, who've done this research, have made a submission to the government's budget and spending review, and they call on the government to provide immediate clarity, and they call for a national solution on how the Treasury plans to manage councils' high needs deficits if this override that I talked about earlier comes to an end in March 2026. And what the CCN are warning is that just removing or limiting councils' exposure to high needs deficits is only one part of the solution, because what is actually needed is a complete reform of the SEND system, because at the moment the system doesn't work. It doesn't work for parents, it doesn't work for young people, and it doesn't work for councils who are trying to manage these budget deficits. And it isn't addressing the level of demand on specialist services, and it's not addressing the costs, which are, spiraling completely out of control. And there's loads of other different sort of layers to the costs as well. So where you've got the surge to social care needs and children's services and things like that, you've also got a greater need for homeschool transport, because transport law makes it very clear that if a young person goes to a specialist setting, it's their closest suitable setting, which it would be if it's been named on an EHC plan, because anywhere closer and or more cost effective would have been named if it was suitable. The more of these settings that are being named, the greater the transport cost is as well. And there are some children who are needing, because there's no provision nearer them, to travel in a taxi of an hour, and in some cases even more, even though for those children it actually goes against what the legal guidance says about distance. They're having to go in a taxi for an hour each way a day. And if we think about how expensive that would be, you're looking at taxi bills upwards of £10,000 to £15,000 a year on top of whatever the funding is. And so where you've got that rise in that, you've also got that rise too. And more and more councils are predicting that they are needing to issue a section 114.114 before 2027, and that is basically the last resort for local authorities in the UK that is experiencing financial difficulties. It's essentially a notice, which means bankruptcy, and it prevents the council, if they've done this notice, this section 114, it prevents the council from them making any new spending commitments. and requires a new budget submission within just a 21-day period. So this is a really huge thing to be happening. Um, and we know, because we've talked about it already in this Facebook Live, that there's a certain number of councils which are at risk of this bankruptcy notice. Well, this research by the CCN is saying that if this statutory override, which allows sort of certain elements of the budget deficit not to be essentially put on paper, if that does expire, then the number of councils at risk of then declaring bankruptcy increases by 60%. So a total of 26 of the 38 county and rural unitary authorities would then be at risk of issuing a Section 114 notice before 2027. And including and in that includes 18 local authorities who would essentially go insolvent overnight by March next year, by March 2026. And only 4 councils at present believe that they can remain solvent by the end of the parliamentary year if their SEND deficit was transferred to their revenue budget. 4 out of 38. It is huge. It's just mind-blowing, massive amounts of money. So what are councils saying then? They are saying that if the government writes off these deficits, so if they say, right, we're just going to write off and start again, it doesn't actually solve any of the problem. It doesn't deal with the fundamental financial challenges caused by how broken the system is. And if that goes unchecked, then the new analysis of this data shows that SEND deficits would just continue to grow. So, you can just say, right, we're going to write off these deficits. We're just going to pretend that they've gone and we're going to start again. They'll just come back and they'll grow. And they could then reach 3.8 billion by the end of that year, and nationally, 8 billion. 95% of council chief executives in this survey by the CCM have said that comprehensive fundamental reform to the system is essential, and that needs to happen within this next 18 months. Now, we see calls for reform all the time, and we saw them in the previous government, and the current government, when they were looking to come into power, made quite a lot of significant promises around changes and reform that we are currently yet to see. We've got a Facebook Live in a few weeks' time, actually, where we're going to be talking exclusively about the schools bill, which has just come in with, and there's multiple things within the schools bill that affect SEND's families. If you don't know the schools bill, my advice is to go away and do a bit of Googling, but definitely come along to that Facebook Live in a few weeks' time and you see that advertised, because we're going to be talking about that. And that is what this government's attempt at, the beginnings of reform is all about. So what does reform look like? Part of this research the CCN have done, they've called upon particular experts, and one councillor whose name is Kate Fole, and she's the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities spokesperson for the County Councils Network. So she's a councillor within county councils, and she's her area of specialism is SEND. And she has said the following, which I think is a really, really sort of concise summary of where we're at. She said, the current SEND system works for no one. It doesn't work for parents, young people and councils alike. And during the last decade, demand and costs have spiralled out of control, leaving local authorities with deficits which are unmanageable. This is despite local authorities doing everything in their power to address costs. Well, everything in their power to address costs is perhaps a little subjective if you take into account the experiences of our families. This survey shows the reality of what would happen if these deficits are not addressed and the statutory override is removed. An immediate financial emergency that would lead to dozens of councils declaring bankruptcy in the next 18 months, and only 4 out of 38 surveyed surviving the decade. Considering only 6 councils in the whole of England have declared bankruptcy in the last 10 years, this is a really eye-opening figure. And each and every Section 114 notice would be catastrophic for local services. With the clock ticking to March 26, when these deficits are placed back onto councils' budget books, the government must provide immediate clarity on a national solution to eliminating or managing councils' deficits, but this is only one part of the solution. We need root and branch reform of the SEND system to address the key issues driving demand and cost, including flipping the system, and this is interesting, to make mainstream schools more inclusive for SEND pupils. Excuse me. I've had a really bad cough over the whole of Christmas. It's still lingering, so I apologise. It's very irritating for you all to listen to me coughing. Now, making mainstream schools more inclusive for SEND pupils is a really great goal. Of course it is. We at Sunshine Support are all about true inclusion. There are problems with it, though, as a concept. One of them being the fundamental environmental incompatibilities of some mainstream schools for some of our children with special educational needs and disabilities. Simply the layout of schools, the number of children in a school, the rigidity that those schools have to put in place about things like timetable, curriculum, where you have to be and when. The limitations of things like having enough rooms for students to have proper quality breakout spaces, safe spaces, sensory spaces. These things are not going to be made any better in mainstream schools unless there's a significant injection of funding into the infrastructure of the buildings. Children simply can't access these environments if they have particular, sensory needs, for example. There needs to be a significant investment in teacher training around SEND. Most new teachers who go into the profession have little more than just a week on SEND, where they might go and observe some special needs lessons or do some theory-based work around special needs. Most special needs teachers didn't start off as special needs teachers. They started off as mainstream teachers who developed a love of SEND. That was my background. I was a secondary English teacher by training. And in 2011, I moved across into special education because I realised it was a real passion area of mine. And I've not looked back since. I headed up an English department in a special needs school and then became head of an independent residential and day provision. I became head of the school part. And that was only through, my own on-the-job progression and training. I had no SEND training when I became a teacher, and that hasn't changed. And I trained in 2005, and it hasn't changed really. And until we have a significant more investment in helping teachers understand SEND, then the mainstream environment is never going to be inclusive enough to ensure that children can attend, those children with our most complex needs can attend those settings. Your average teacher in a school, a primary school, secondary school, simply is so overworked and overwhelmed that they don't even have time to sit most of the time and read an EHCP from sort of back to front, which is baffling, when you think about it, because those are the children in a classroom who require the greatest level of understanding, of empathy. You have to know them inside out. You have to be almost like, I don't know, a psychic almost sometimes about, picking up on the smallest cues of need, particularly children who mask. And they're most vulnerable most of the time because they might look fine and then they're not fine. And if you don't have that really acute level of understanding of things like masking and fawning and how perhaps different needs present differently in boys and girls, for example, if you don't have that, then you could be the most well-meaning, best teacher ever, but you just simply don't have the tools. And Senkos often are so overworked. Senkos are teaching teachers some of the time, and they are often only given a proportion of their working week for Senko stuff. My view personally is that Senko shouldn't have a teaching timetable at all. They should teach, they should be part of the classroom, they should do cover lessons, they should come and do PPA for other teachers, that type of thing. But a committed teaching timetable is just too much for Senko. And small things like that type of reform. And we do see this in some really forward-thinking maintained mainstream schools where they have really, taking the Senko off timetable and stuff. They are often the best ones because that Senko can then be a real strategist in terms of upskilling the rest of the team. And but it doesn't happen everywhere because there's simply not the resources, there's not the infrastructure, there's not the money. And almost until that sort of view of reform is national, if there's a national expectation, say, for example, for Senkos not to have a teaching commitment, what you get is a real sort of mismatch, hodgepodgey experience of education, almost like a bit of a lottery. And we see this in SEND families who move schools, who are somewhere, in a school where they've really got a good handle on things. They have their child on the SEN register. They have really high quality individual education plans. They've got amazing, robust assess plan, do review cycles, super duper. And then they change schools and a different school has a completely different approach. And then that child can go from thriving to collapsing in a really alarming space of time. And then what happens? Well, then of course you have no other choice as parents other than to look elsewhere, to look into the special sector, to look into the independent sector, because you have no other choice to do so. And then you feel like you're being blamed then because you read about these articles and you read about what people are saying about, oh, well, it's all of these families seeking these really expensive SEND placements. Nobody would seek that if there was a different option. It just wouldn't. No one asks for this difficult life. This is the thing that makes me so cross, especially when I'm sitting supporting families in meetings and there's this feeling of like, well, if maybe you tried a bit harder, parents, to get them to school, then you might not need to. Oh, it just makes me so furious on behalf of parents. It really, really does. And you've probably heard about this safety valve scheme. So those 38 councils with the biggest deficits in their spending on pupils with SEND have been promised these bailouts, these safety valve schemes. And to get the bailout of money, they have to show in exchange that they've met these really strict cost-cutting measures. And those cost-cutting measures, I'm sorry to be controversial, well, I'm not sorry actually, they force councils to break the law. They do. Because this is where you get councils going, no, you can't have that placement, you're going to have to go to mainstream, when all the evidence is saying mainstream's completely unsuitable. And then those councils go into like tribunals, even judicial reviews in some cases where provision isn't being made as per the EHC plan. And somebody was asking actually in the chat about PAPs. I'll come to that question in a minute, pre-action protocol letters. So many of our families are having to resort to pre-action protocol letters because councils are just simply not providing what's in the plan. And they're doing it because they are trying to operate the safety valve process. And we've heard from families who are, local to Sunshine Support, so in the Midlands areas. And we heard about one earlier who've been well placed in schools, and then just that school's like the rug has just been pulled from under in order to move pupils to cheaper options. And the impact that this has on families is just significant. We at Sunshine Support are dealing with a number of families in appeal. We do this every day. And these families are denied access by support, by councils who are in these safety valve areas. And there's no real reason given. It's just, no, this is a school we're naming. See you in court. And it is just awful. So on that note, I'm going to go to some of the comments now. Bear with as I scroll back through. We've got a question from somebody saying, My question is, as we are going through tribunal in October to change a setting, so I know this family, hi family, I'm working with them at the moment. They would like to go from one special setting to another, but the new one is a significantly more expensive one. If the case is won, would the LA cover the cost of the school as they're cutting everything out? Well, by law they have to. So if you win a case either at tribunal or the local authority concedes the case, so they essentially say you can have what you want without actually going to the hearing, and a school is named in section I, then that is by law that it has to be funded. And this too is the case for families who may have an independent school named on the EHCP. So we're not even talking a special school, we're talking simply a mainstream independent setting. If you have that named in section I, just simply the name of the setting, I don't know, St something school, and you just pop it in section I, then the local authority is equally legally obliged to pay for the whole cost of that placement, inclusive of the placement fees, as well as any top-up fees required to meet the SEND need. That can't be escaped. So even though the local authority is seeking to cut costs, if at tribunal your case is won and the school is named in I, that local authority can't then say, oh, we're not going to fund it. You have to fund it. They also can't fund it and then immediately try and take it away, because that goes against the rules of how the tribunal works. Once the tribunal has ruled and a new EHC plan is presented and provided, there has to be an exceptional reason to have an early annual review. Like there has to be a massive change to the child or the situation or something. Otherwise, that EHC plan needs to stand for at least a year. And you would hope that the local authority wouldn't, after a year, turn around and try and change the setting. But, you know, like I said, I have done my best to be not cynical, but unfortunately, my ability to be not cynical is diminishing somewhat. So hopefully that answers that question. We have a question about PAPs. Are PAP letters working? Or are local authorities leaning on these funding difficulties? I've spent £15,000, gosh, so far trying to get my local authority to listen. It's absolutely obscene, and the PAP is my last resort, and the local authority want to look at prosecution next rather than listening. Prosecution, presumably for lack of attendance, because your child probably can't attend a setting that's inappropriate for them. The long and the short of it regarding PAP letters, so the pre-action protocol letter, is that we do see exceptional levels of success at Sunshine Support for the PAP letters that we produce. PAP letters are quite complex things. They can be issued for any breach of specific legal elements of the EHC process. I'll give you an example. If a very straightforward example of a PAP is if you have initiated the EHC needs assessment process and the local authority has missed statutory deadlines within that process. So if they, for example, don't tell you within 6 weeks whether they're going to assess or not, that's a missed deadline and that's PAPable. If they then don't tell you, or they don't, if they decide that they are going to assess, but then they don't tell you if they're going to issue a plan or not by week 16 of the process, that is another broken deadline. That is a PAP letter. Then there are more complex PAP letters that aren't to do with deadlines, but are to do with the local authority not providing the provision that's in section F of the plan. So if, for example, you're placed in a school and section F says child will be given thing X and that school is not providing it, then your recourse is to then go to the local authority to say, local authority, you are failing in your duty to ensure the school can provide this, because you can't PAP a school, you PAP the local authority, because legally, contractually, they are the ones responsible for making the provision that they outsource by naming a school. And if by naming that school, that provision isn't then delivered, it's the local authority that's accountable. So you can PAP for that too. And there are a multitude of other things that PAP letters are appropriate for, and it's the beginning of the judicial review process. So rather than going to, say, the SEND case officer at the local authority, that PAP letter goes to the legal team at the local authority, the solicitors, and they have 2 weeks to respond to your PAP letter. And again, that's sort of law. And what you find by doing a PAP is, because of that process and because it goes to a legal bod, the rate of response is considerably better than perhaps some of the rates of response that you may have experienced through your caseworker and stuff. My advice is always, when it comes to PAPs, you want to act quickly. And I can appreciate that this is quite difficult for people, because by the human nature, and particularly SEND families who tend to be quite, empathetic people, we want to give people the benefit of the doubt, particularly if you've got a really nice case officer who's evidently really overworked and stressed. You don't want to cause a fuss if you don't, absolutely have to. So what we find is that sometimes families delay PAPs because it all feels a bit frightening and it feels a bit pushy. And they think, well, maybe if I just send a few more emails, then I might get somewhere. In our experience, you've got to be decisive and quick with a PAP. You don't want to muck around. If there's been a missed deadline, if there's something that isn't being delivered, look into whether a PAP is appropriate. And that's something that we can help you with at Sunshine Support. I know some of our Sunshine Elves have been in the chat, giving out the link to try and get a bit of support there. But yeah, long story short is we do find that we have quite a good success rate with PAPs. I'll give you an example of one particular thing. It's where the local authority says, sorry, we're going to go past our deadlines for your EHC needs assessment because we don't have any EPs. You are 89th on the list and we can't tell you when you'll be seen by an EP. The PAP is very helpful there, because what we have found in the majority of cases, 99% of cases, that a PAP to say that's not good enough, these are your statutory deadlines, has resulted in the somewhat miraculous appearance of an EP. So that's something to bear in mind. We have a comment. Gillian says, what I don't understand is why local authorities are paying for the extremely expensive private settings. I know, as I worked in one and saw the costs, when it'd be cheaper and more controllable to have appropriate council-run specialist provision. Just no forethought in it. And that's exactly it. It's, we want better local authority provision. However, that's going to take some investment. It's going to take some reform. We're going to need new buildings. We're going to need more teachers. We're going to need better training. We're going to need so much more, because two special schools are not alike. Some local authority special schools are very catch-all. And I know through working with some of my families that some young people, for some young people, it's incredibly important for them to sort of find their tribe. So find really similar young people to them with similar presentation and interests, And sometimes they will go and see a local authority maintained special school, which has a really big spectrum of needs, and they just don't feel like it's home. And they sort of look around and think, I can't see myself here. These are not my people. And what we need is better specialism-based local authority settings. Really high quality speech and language settings, really high quality social emotional settings, which aren't just simply behavioural, because there are so many young people with SEMH needs that don't present as challenging behaviours. And if those children are put in settings which are full of challenging behaviours, the impact is, it's just awful on that young person's mental well-being. So we need a lot more specialism in our ground roots sort of local authority settings. Scrolling down the questions. Oh, what have we got? We've got Yvonne saying, totally agree about Senkos, as in my chat about Senko shouldn't have to teach. School of over 2,000 students and the Senko teaches most of the week. They apparently only have 26 children with SEND and 2 of those are mine. Well, they definitely have more children with SEND, but because of that overstretched Senko, they can't address it. I met a Senko the other week who I just wanted to give her a hug. One of the first things she said to me was, we can't apply for an EHC needs assessment for this child because we've already applied for our quota of 5. And I said, sorry, what? Oh, well, we can only apply for 5 per like half term or term or whatever it was. I can't remember what it was. And I said, well, who said that? Our local authority caseworker. It's like, sorry, what now? Of course, I can easily step in and support parents and do a parental-led application, but there's nothing in law that says you can only apply for 5 EHC needs assessments at the term, and no Senko should ever be told that. And this poor overworked Senko doesn't have the time to push back or challenge. It's just, it's just so sad. Someone said we're a council under the safety valve and trying to work with the local authority has become impossible. Yeah, I totally see that. How do you find out which councils are under safety valve agreements? Well, there are several ways of doing that. It's mostly Googleable. You can simply write to your council and ask. It's also quite an enlightening thing to do a Freedom of Information Act request in terms of send spend. I do them a lot for appeals. So when I'm arguing about transport in particular and where that has to be factored into costs and things, I often do a Freedom of Information Act requests to find out the spend on transport, the average spend, because I can find that that's often very helpful in an appeal argument. And it's very easy to do an FOI request, very easy to find out how to do it online. We can help you with them at Sunshine. There's also a really good webinar coming up really imminently, actually next week, on how to access data. So how to find out your data from different places, either via a DSAR, so a data subject access request, or Freedom of Information Act or similar. And that data can be incredibly enlightening. But in the first instance, write to your council and ask, which would be a good thing. We have somebody sharing their story, which I'm going to read to you. My daughter's out of school 8 years. I hope that means she's 8 years old, not been out of school for 8 years, because good grief. ASD, ADHD, anxiety, non-Section 41 school has offered her a place. So a non-Section 41 school is a special school. So Section 41 only applies to special schools. And if it's non-Section 41, it means it's not approved by the Secretary of State. Now, that doesn't mean anything bad. Some people, their minds often go to, oh, not approved, that means it's bad. Actually, not at all. It means it's an independent special school who have chosen not to seek Secretary of State approval. This gives them a lot of control over who they admit. So if they're non-Section 41, a tribunal or a council can't direct them to accept a pupil. They can't by law. They have to offer a place before one can be named in a hearing or named by a council. I was head of a non-Section 41 school, hence why we went to tribunal a lot. A non-Section 1 school's offered her a place. The local authority has no suitable school to name. 51 weeks EHC process now. 51 weeks. It's meant to be 20-week process and nothing named. I smell a PAP letter. Refusing to add OT provision from an assessment the local authority paid for. Oh, my lord. Only setting they're suggesting is an ERF, which is like a sort of enhanced resource facility. So it's like a little hub on a mainstream school usually, which is not yet built and not due to open until September. Tribunal is October 25, but how is it legal to name a provision that does not yet exist and then keep her out of school till then? I imagine the local authority will be trying to use Section 19 as an interim measure. Section 19 is for young people who can't attend school for 15 days or more due to a number of different potential reasons. That is a typical playing the system thing of, we know that you won't get an appeal hearing for a year, tough luck sort of thing, which is just, I feel so sorry for you. I can't tell you how awful that is. I would definitely, if you need support with that appeal, give us a shout, because this is right within my wheelhouse, that particular type of appeal. So Tasha saying this is all so complicated and hard to deal with when you have a SEND child to look after too. Why do we have to fight everything? I'm exhausted. Oh, my heart does absolutely go out to you, because the appeal process as well is not friendly for parents. You know, you'd expect parents, if they're doing an appeal, that will be the one and only time you do it. It's not an everyday thing for you. It's incredibly stressful. The concept of going to court is really stressful. And you have to trust, you know, what you're being told by, say, the other party is accurate. And so often it's not. You know, families that I represent, I have to go back to the other party, the local authority, and say, you can't do that. You can't say that. You can't do that with the evidence. You can't. And, you know, they often say, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, noted. We'll do it a different way. And you think, if that family wasn't being represented, what on earth would have happened? Absolutely terrible. Yvonne, I'm getting pushback on provision under Section 19. Local authority saying it's the school's responsibility, yet the Act says it's the local authority's responsibility. What is the truth? I know of one particular local authority who has done this very recently, has said you can't, your child with SEND, who has the notional SEND budget provided to them by school, the school has to use that for Section 19. No, the Act is very clear. Section 19 is the responsibility of the local authority. This is where you need to look at the PAP process to bypass what you're being told by SEND and go straight to the legal team. We have, oh, lovely Susanna, who we know really well, a big friend of Sunshine. Emily, our lovely advocate Emily, myself are fighting the local authority to get my son's review from last April to be put into draft form that is acceptable. They want his phased transition for September 2026 to take place this half term. Yet EHCP is nearly 2 years out of date and it's very early to take place. Yeah, one thing we're finding a lot is local authorities are trying to do phased transfer reviews earlier and earlier and earlier, because if they do them when they're meant to be done, which is the autumn term of the phased transfer year. So if you're say starting year 7 in September 2025, you should have already had your phased transfer review September, October sort of time. Local authorities keep pushing it backwards. So going into year 5 and earlier and earlier into year 5, because they can't cope with the backlog that is arising from those autumn term reviews, and they're not then naming the right setting by the statutory deadline of the 15th of February. And then, of course, that's pappable. And that causes a lot of problems. So they keep trying to do phase transfer reviews earlier and earlier and earlier. And of course, think about how much your average child changes in the course of a year and a half when they're in year 5. And then think about how much a SEND child could change in that time, given all the additional complexities and pressures that they face. Not great. Oh, hi, Claire. Sorry, Claire's family of mine. Or you can have an LA like mine that doesn't care even when you do PAP them. They have such a turnover of staff that they'd rather leave it for the next person to deal with via tribunal. Very, very true. Very, very true. Scrolling down. Yeah, Yvonne's saying that the head of children's services are the one saying that schools need to pick up the Section 19 provision. Again, think go sort of down down the legal route, I would there, very much so. And we've had a comment on YouTube as well, which is really great. Hi, YouTube viewers. Nice to see you. And I've got just enough time to address our comment on YouTube as well. Mainstream schools need specialist staff within their own staffing structure too. 100% agree. Not just people who have an interest in sending, who've done some CPD. We want specialists. I mean, we have our fantastic advocate, Gabby Gregory. She was a DLD and speech and language specialist teacher, and she ran a language unit. And she is incredible at going into schools and upskilling staff with regard to things like speech and language needs and DLD. But it's just not enough. There has to be this sort of whole scale investment in this. This needs to be part of the reform. Making mainstream schools more inclusive is not a quick fix. Strategic planning at the highest level, huge investment in training in school buildings. 100% agree. It has to be a huge overhaul. And excuse me, sorry about this cough. And I'm just going to end with a little bit of an interesting article from Schools Week. and essentially the DfE's chief safety valve negotiator, Tony McArdle, has said that he welcomes any work such as this survey to facilitate a better scheme and look at the programme and identify how it's going and how it could be done better is welcome. But ultimately, there's a big school of thought that says the safety valve system just needs scrapping. If councils need more money, this is not the way to do it. They can't cut services that are a matter of statute, so a matter of law, of legal entitlement. You can't just cut those. It just is not the way forward. Local authorities need the right level of funding to ensure that they can meet their legal obligations. And safety valve agreements, which commit local authorities to deliver these widespread cuts to high needs provision, they're not going to resolve issues with SEND provision for either local authorities or families with disabled children. They're just not. It's just not going to work. So I think I've addressed most questions. I hope anyway. And if you're not too fed up with the sound of my voice, I'll be popping up again in a few weeks' time to talk about the schools bill. Live on Facebook on Tuesday, I think the 21st of January, I think we're looking at doing that. So keep an eye out for that. And of course, if you are interested in hearing more, particularly about my views about schools and how schools can support with SEND, I've got some really useful webinars on our Sunshine Academy training platform, particularly around my special area of interest, which is PDA in schools. If you would like, if you're not fed up with me, would like to hear more about that, I would encourage you to log on to the Sunshine Academy and watch some of those. But it has been an absolute pleasure. And I will leave you this morning with genuine best wishes for all of you out there fighting against a broken system. Here at Sunshine Support, I can't tell you how passionately we feel about supporting you through each stage of the process. Our advocacy team and all of our events and marketing team and our inquiries team, we are all so united in that passion. We do this job because we believe that we can make a difference, and we do make a difference. We have amazing results for our families. But as I always say, I love my job, but I do wish I didn't have to exist. I wish the system wasn't broken. I wish you didn't need us. But if you do, please do reach out, because yeah, we are super passionate about helping you through these really difficult waters, to hopefully get the right setting for your child, and the right provision for them too. So all the very best, and please do get in touch if you need us. It's been a pleasure this morning. Thank you so much for participating in the chat, and I hope to see you on another live again very, very soon. Take care